book of Hebrews, chapter 11. Now, interestingly enough, we're going to look at a character by the name of Sarah tonight. Last week or 2 weeks ago or something, I was talking to my wife. I said, honey, it's hard to find any books or comments about Sarah. It's easy to find material about Noah or Abraham or anything like that. I just can't find very much. She goes, Dave, did you try reading the Bible? Because I was reading in all these books and such, you know. I said, well, yeah, I have. She says, okay, just curious. But anyway, Hebrews chapter 11. Now, by the way, starting in verse 8, it's going to start all the way down to verse 19, talking about Abraham and his faith. So we looked at that last week, but sandwiched in all of that is a verse, because Sarah was married to Abraham. Verse 11, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age. Why? Because she judged him faithful who had promised. Now, I love that phrase there, she judged him faithful, which is interesting because when you think of probably the first things that come to your mind about Sarah was that she laughed at God. So why would God say, not laughed at God, God's promise, I guess I should say. So why would it say here she was a woman of faith? Well, keep in mind, all these other guys in here, they had faults too, you know. But this is a whole chapter of their faith. And so even though Sarah did have a weak point in her life, by and large, she was a woman of faith. And so we're going to look at that tonight. So let's go to the book of Genesis to look at her story. And we're going to start out at Genesis chapter 11. Now, unless otherwise noted, all the references will be in Genesis tonight. Let me make an introductory statement. Much of who we are due to circumstances in our life and how we respond to those circumstances. I can look back in my life and the fact that my dad raised me, and my mom was an alcoholic. My dad did drink, and there was some issues there because of that alcohol, but he was a hard-working dad, and my dad died, and relatives tried to steal the inheritance, and I was shuffled around, and then I got saved. I met my wife. I can look at different events in my life and how I was discipled and went to a Bible college, and all of those have circumstances and people in them that God orchestrated to make me who I am today. And all of you have stories too, and you look back with 20/20 vision sometimes and be able to sit there and say, boy, that was there and that was there. But we also know people who've had similar situations who respond in a bad way, and it makes them very jaded and angry and against God almost. And so oftentimes it's the circumstances that form us and how we respond to those circumstances. Well, we're going to take a bird's eye view through the life of this woman by the name of Sarah. Some of it will be familiar because we just discussed her husband, Abraham. And so we won't be looking up all of these verses. However, we are going to do a lot of skimming tonight. All right, so let's first of all look at chapter 11, verse 29, if you will. Chapter 11, verse 29. And Abram and Nahor took them wives, and name of Abram's wife was Sarah. And just for the sake of time, I'm just going to always say Sarah rather than Sarai, Sarah, Abram, Abraham. Sometimes even in your notes I put Abe, just for conciseness. But notice, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarah was barren, she had no child. So number one, she was married but had no child or no children is what we want. Now, if you were to summarize Sarah's life by 3 words, all of them will start with the letter B, And the very first one is there. Sarah was barren. Sarah was barren. In that time and age particularly, it was very important to have children, much more than today in our society, particularly then and there. To have a child was important. For a woman to be barren, it was looked down upon, and a woman did not want to do that or be that way. So Sarah was barren. Number 2, look at verse 31. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from where? Ur. All right, so number 2, she grew up in a godless society in Ur. Remember last week we looked at Abraham's life, and Joshua chapter 24 said that all of Abraham's relatives served gods. They had idols. And so in that land over there, their first priority was not Jehovah God, the God. They had other idols. So she had that as a background, much like her husband. But look again at the verse 31. To go into the land of Canaan, they came unto Haran and dwelt there. So number 3 in your notes, she followed Abraham to Haran and then to Canaan. Now, I did not include the map that we had last week up there, but if you remember, way over here is the Euphrates River. Ur was way down here. Haran was up here in upper Mesopotamia, and then Israel, the promised land, was here. When they left Ur, we do not know how old Abraham was. However, then they go up to Haran. They dwelt there. Again, we do not know how long. Could be weeks, could be months, it could be years. But we do know, according to the Bible, how old Abraham was when he left Haran to go to the promised land. Look at chapter 12, verse 4. Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Now, there is a 10-year age difference between Abraham and his wife Sarah. We'll see that later in another reference, but there's a 10-year age difference. So in your notes, you have, it just says A is 75, that's Abraham, and S is 65, that's Sarah. So she's 65 years old, still no children, still barren. But I want you to know that most of her life she was raised a certain way. Now she is with a man, and they too pack up everything and leave most everybody from their land, and now they're going to a land that they've never been, but they dwell in Haran. So she's willing to do all of that. Look at verse 2 and 3. We read this last week. This is the promise that God's making Abraham. I'm going to make thee a great nation. I will bless thee. You'll be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee. All of those things. So that's number 4 in our notes, that God promises Abraham's descendants would be a great nation. So she sees, number 5, Abraham following God and worshiping God. Look at chapter 12, verse 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So he names that place Bethel. He travels for a little bit. When he comes back, he stops at that same place. Look at chapter 13. Look at verse number 4. Unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So here she is. I'm trying to paint a picture of how her faith has developed over the years. So she grew up one way, but now she's with a husband who is a believer in the Lord, following the Lord, worshiping the Lord, and she is now being influenced by her husband. Not to say that she does not have that faith as well, but nevertheless she is surrounded by it. And a lot of who we are is what influences. It used to be said before the internet, you are who you are based upon the books you read and the people you meet. That was a saying years ago. I remember hearing that in the 80s. But now it's not so many books because people don't read books like they used to. It's the internet, it's the iPhones, it's the influences of electronics. That's who makes us who we are oftentimes. So she sees Abe and following him, worshiping him. Look at chapter 12. Look at verse 10. What was in the land? A famine. Do you see that? So number 6 in our notes, due to a famine, she moves to Egypt, and that's where Abe is going to tell her to lie. So let's look at verse 10. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there. That just means to stay temporarily. For the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter to Egypt, that he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, I ask thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. Now, by the way, he's already admitted that she's beautiful. Look at the end of look at verse 14. It came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was not just fair, but very fair. So he knew that she was a looker, and now that they're actually down in Egypt, they are actually looking at her. And so the second B word that summarizes Sarah's life is beautiful. Sarah was barren, she was beautiful. Now, I did just put some notes in your notes. We're not going to take time to study it. You can look at it later. Either Sarah is a half-sister of Abraham or a niece, but she is related to him. So when he says, hey, don't tell him you're my wife, tell him this. Whether you want to call it a lie or not, I will, but whether you see it, it's not really a lie, it's just not disclosing the whole truth, you know. But nevertheless, he tells her to do that. And so they're down there in Egypt. Well, another thing that we know about her is that she lived financially well. Look at chapter 13, verse 2. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. At the end of verse 6, it says their substance was great. Now, nowhere could I find in here that really it impacted her a lot, that she was wealthy. I just wanted to make it a point that sometimes money does influence people and make them who they are to a degree. But nevertheless, she was financially well off. Number 8, she was concerned over family strife and safety. Family strife and safety. Here in chapter 13, because Lot was with him and his substance was great, Lot was being prosperous as well, so there was family strife. In fact, their herdsmen, you can see it in verse 7, began to have strife. Then verse 8, Abraham says unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. And so he says, look, let's head this off the pass so we don't get into family strife. So here was a woman who was dealing with these family dynamics that sometimes goes on, that sometimes mothers are the referee and the ear to it all. You know, they're hearing all of it, but really don't have a lot of power to do anything about it. Well, not only that, but she was concerned about the safety. Look at chapter 14. Lot, who's now living in Sodom, gets captured. Look at verse 12, chapter 14, verse 12. And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And verse 14, Abram heard that his brother was taken captive. He armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So here is Sarah at home, biting her nails, worried, stiff, that her husband's going to die, trying to rescue Lot. And so she's going through this anxiety and stress about life and loved ones and the difficulties and the stress and the strife and all of those things. Well, in chapter 13 and in chapter 14, God repeats the promise of a child 2 more times. So he's told Abraham specifically, hey, you are going to have a child. You are going to have a child. I will make thee a great nation. This is all going to come to pass. Well, look over to chapter 16, if you will. Chapter 16, look at verse 1. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children. All right, so several more years have passed. She had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Look at verse 3. Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt how many years? In verse 3. 10 years in the land of Canaan. So that's your blank there on number 10 in your notes. 10 years pass, and Sarah suggests that Hagar become as a means for children. Now, we do know how old they are at this time. Look at verse 16, the last verse of chapter 16. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. So after Hagar becomes pregnant, has a child, Ishmael is there. Abram is 86, which means Sarah is 76. So when they left Haran, he was 75, and now he's 86. So 10, 11 years have now passed, and she's still without child. And yet God has still kept promising, you are going to have a child, you are going to have a child, you are going to have a child. They got a little impatient here and did not wait on God's timing, much like we have done many times, I'm sure. Well, let's go back to chapter 16. How did Sarah respond to this after years and years of not having children? All of a sudden, this one woman comes into the scene of Abraham, and she conceives. So we know it's not Abraham's fault for not having children, so it must be her fault. So now she's going to feel this lowliness like I'm a failure, plus she's going to take it out on Hagar. Look at chapter 16, look at verse 4. He went unto Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Look at the end of verse 6. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So fill this in, number 11. Sarah despised Hagar and was harsh to her. The word hardly means harsh. Again, she has all these feelings of frustration. She knows about the promises of a child, but it's not through her so far. All right, so let's go to chapter 17. Chapter 17. Y'all with me tonight? This is neat. I've enjoyed getting this ready. I really have. Chapter 17, look at verse 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be thou perfect. Skip down to verse 17. Wait a minute. Let's do some math here. Abram is 99, and that which means Sarah is 89. If he was 86 when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, how many years have passed? 13. So number 12 in your notes, 13 years pass, and God is going to assure Abraham of a child. He's going to be very specific here. It is not Ishmael. Look at verse 15. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarah thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be, and I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her. She shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and did what? Laughed. All right, so we're going to see 3 laughs here. The first one is Abraham, but Put this in, and I'll explain my point here. The first laugh is Abraham's dependence. Dependence. Now, normally when we have laughter, particularly when someone tells us hey, by the way, you're 99 years old and you're going to have a child, and your wife is 89 and she's going to have a child, the first thought that comes to my mind, that's a good one, God. That kind of laughter. But I don't think it was that kind of laughter. I think it was like, oh, God, are you kidding me? Is this for real? That's amazing. The reason why I say that is because, well, let's read the text here, and then I'll show you. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? Abraham said unto God, oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. So he's trying to make some sense of this. So he didn't understand how this was physically possible, but I still think he did not waver in his faith. He did not lack faith in that laughter. There was more of a dependence there. Look at verse 21. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. So 1 year from now, she's going to give birth. Now, I don't know if I included this. Did I include I didn't. Okay. Take your Bible. Hold your place here in Genesis. Did I include another reference here in Romans on the screen or no? No reference? Yeah, but I don't know if I put it on the screen. So let's go to Romans chapter 4. Let me show you this. This is the verse that I think helps us understand that his laughter was more of, even though he didn't understand it, he believed God that it was going to come to pass. Romans chapter 4, look at verse 18. Now it's talking about Abraham. You see that at the end of verse 16. So verse 18, who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations according to that which was spoken. So shall thy seed be. And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead. In other words, he's not able physically to have children. When he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith, giving glory to God. So based upon that reference, I think the laughter was more of a dependence. It was more of a, okay, God, if you say so, I don't understand it. Oh, that type of laughter. So I put dependence there. By the way, look at verse 19, back in Genesis chapter 17. God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. The word Isaac means laughter. I think that is hilarious how God said, by the way, I'm going to constantly remind you of this. Let's call him Isaac, so that every time you see this boy, it's going to remind you of laughter. Well, go to chapter 18, if you will. Chapter 18. We'll go on to point 13 here. Look at verse 1. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre. He sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. When he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. So it goes on and explains, one of these is an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Christ. It's a theophany. And he's got 2 angels with him. Skip down to verse 10. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Skip down at verse, by the way, let's just read the verses here. Verse 12, therefore Sarah laughed within herself. That's very important. There was no outward laughter. It was kind of like a chuckle on the inside. And saying, after I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure? My Lord being old also? The Lord said to Abraham, wherefore did Sarah laugh? Notice how the Lord knows the inside, because she laughed within. And God knows the inside of our heart, what really goes on as well. Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I of a surety bear a child which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed, I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laugh not. Now, if her laughter was one of faith, why would she deny it? So I put this, the second laugh is Sarah's doubt. The second laugh here, the first laugh was Abraham's dependence, second laugh was Sarah's doubt. All right, now chapter 19, the whole chapter, it's kind of a lengthy chapter as well, 38 verses, is all about Sodom and Gomorrah. And the only reason why I include this chapter is because here is Sarah who knew Lot, Mrs. Lot, and the Lot children, the whole lot of them, and knew them before they got to Sodom. And now she has known them from a distance, but nevertheless known the spiritual condition of them now that they're in Sodom. That's a heartbreak when you see a loved one go astray. She knows their whole spiritual condition. And now she's going to witness the destruction of Sodom and the demise of Lot's wife. That has an impact on a person as well. All right, so let's skip over to chapter 21. Chapter 21. So now a year has happened, and Sarah has become pregnant. Chapter 21, verse 1, and the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. The Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. I love it with those phrases like that, because God always keeps his word. Sarah conceived and bare Abraham his son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac, or laughter. Verse 5, Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. Verse 6, and Sarah said, God hath made me to what? Laugh. So that all that hear will laugh with me. She said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So here's the third laugh, but this is Sarah's delight. Sarah's delight. Finally, after all of these years, she was barren, she was beautiful, but now we see that she's blessed. She's blessed. That's the last square right there. She's blessed. She's now saying, I am laughing with joy because now the fulfillment of not only what I desired, but God's promises have come true. His name is Isaac of all things, laughter. And now for the next several years, as he is not only weaned and grown up and educated and taught and becoming a man, she is going to be reminded constantly of God's faithfulness. She judged him faithful, as Hebrews chapter 11 says. Well, go to chapter 20, at the end of chapter 21, verse 34, Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. Chapter 20, and part of chapter 21, Abraham strikes up this relationship with a guy, Abimelech, and they have some interactions and some strife, and they try to settle all that, and there's some blaming going on and everything, but for some reason Abraham stays there for a while. So Sarah is in the land of the Philistines for a while, again raising a son. Well, then we get to chapter 22, and that is the whole story. I didn't even include it in the notes here, really. Chapter 22 is really the time when Abraham's offering up Isaac. Well, that has an impact on a woman as well. But now we want to get to chapter 23. Sarah was 107 and 20 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So she dies at 127 years. So let's again do some math. If Abraham was 100 years old at the time of Isaac's birth. Means Sarah was 90 years old, but she dies at 127 years old. How many years was Isaac at her birth, or how many years did she watch Isaac before she died? 37. So in your notes there, 37 years she was reminded of God's faithfulness. 37 years. She may have been raised one way, but the totality of her life, or what was really important, was that she judged God faithful. I want to show you a passage. I think I got some excerpts here. Okay, let's go to 1 Peter real quick. Let's go to 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 3. Sarah, in this passage, is spoken highly of as a woman to be respected and revered, particularly by other women. And one of the reasons, I want you to notice the qualities that mentions of her. 1 Peter 3:1. Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands. And again, notice all the times that she was moving from Ur to Haran to Canaan, to Egypt, to the Philistines. I mean, she's constantly moving and just listening to the husband. That if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives. And that's talking about if a woman who is a believer is married to a man who is an unbeliever, one of the best ways that she can witness to him is by her lifestyle. Not by her constant nagging or preaching, but by her lifestyle. While they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning, let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair, of wearing of gold, or putting on apparel. Now stop there. We said one of the qualities of Sarah was that she was beautiful. Here, Peter is saying, you know, you can deck yourself out with the makeup and the earrings and the dress and doll yourself up to look beautiful. But what's really beautiful in God's eye is not the outward, but the inward. That's what a lady should really focus in on. Because it says in verse 4, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. So, and that's what I put here as well, inwardly. Every woman today is admonished to have Sarah's beauty inwardly. And here was a woman by God's standard who was beautiful because she focused in on increasing her faith in God. God gave her a son by the name of Isaac to constantly build her faith and remind her, I did promise you. I see how I keep my word? I kept my word. I've been faithful to you. And she constantly was reminded that, so she judged him to be faithful. May God help us to judge him faithful too.